I was 28 years old, sleeping on my best friend's couch and selling watercolor paintings on the sidewalk for $20 each, when a homeless woman with kind eyes asked if she could have the painting of the cherry blossoms because it reminded her of her daughter. I gave it to her without hesitation, watching her clutch it to her chest like it was made of gold, never imagining that 3 years later she would walk into my first solo gallery opening wearing Chanel and carrying a briefcase that cost more than I used to make in 6 months. What she revealed that night didn't just change my understanding of that moment on the street. It transformed my entire life and showed me that sometimes the people we help are actually the ones saving us. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I always love seeing our global community come together. If you enjoy stories about unexpected connections and how one act of kindness can create ripples that change everything, make sure to hit that like button right now and subscribe to our channel so you never miss these inspiring true stories. Now, let me take you back to that suffocating August afternoon 3 years ago when I was just another failed art school graduate trying to convince myself that sleeping on a futon in someone's living room at 28 was temporary, not pathetic. The heat rose from the concrete in waves that made the air shimmer, and I could feel sweat trickling down my spine as I arranged my paintings against the brick wall of the coffee shop on 5th Street. This was my spot. The same 6 feet of sidewalk I'd claimed every weekend for the past 8 months, ever since I'd finally accepted that my degree in fine arts was worth approximately nothing in the real world. I had exactly $43 in my bank account, rent was due in 5 days, and my best friend Maya had started leaving apartment listings on the kitchen counter with increasing frequency. The message was clear. I was running out of time to prove that art could be more than just an expensive hobby. My paintings were small, mostly 8 by 10 inches, because that was all I could afford in terms of canvas and frames. I painted what I loved: cherry blossoms in spring, autumn leaves caught in mid-fall, the way rain looked on window glass, the golden hour light filtering through city buildings. Beautiful things, quiet things. The kind of art that made people pause and smile before they kept walking. But smiling didn't pay bills, and I'd learned that the hard way. I priced everything at $20 because that felt accessible, almost apologetic, like I was saying, "You know this isn't real art, but maybe you'd like it anyway." The rejection was constant and creative. People would stop, admire my work, take photos of it, and then walk away. Some would ask if I took commissions and then ghost me when I followed up. Others would try to negotiate me down to $10, as if $20 wasn't already selling my soul at a discount rate. The worst were the ones who felt compelled to offer advice. As if I hadn't already heard every variation of "Have you tried Etsy?" and "My cousin does art on the side too," and "Maybe you should get a real job and do this as a hobby." I smiled through all of it, thanked them for stopping, and died a little inside every single time. But I kept painting because it was the only thing I'd ever been good at, the only thing that made sense in a world that increasingly felt like it had no place for me. My parents had stopped asking about my career 6 months ago, which somehow hurt more than their earlier disappointment. My mom would call and talk about my younger brother's promotion at his accounting firm, about my sister's new house, about everyone except me, and I knew it was because she didn't know what to say anymore. How do you encourage someone who's failing at the only dream they've ever had? I'd graduated top of my class from art school 4 years ago, won awards, had professors tell me I had real talent, a unique vision. For about 6 months after graduation, I'd believed them. I'd applied to galleries, entered competitions, networked at every art event I could afford to attend. I'd even landed a group show at a small gallery in Brooklyn, sold 2 pieces, felt like maybe I was on my way. Then nothing. Months of nothing. The gallery closed, my applications went unanswered. The competitions rejected me. The art world wasn't need to believe that mattered. Maya had been my roommate in art school, but unlike me, she'd been smart enough to minor in graphic design. She had a good job now at an advertising agency, a nice apartment in a decent neighborhood, and enough disposable income to let me crash on her couch while I figured things out. She never made me feel like a burden, never asked for rent, but I saw the concern in her eyes when I came home after another day of selling nothing. Or worse, selling one painting and feeling pathetic about being excited over $20. She'd started gently suggesting that maybe I could do graphic design too, that it wasn't giving up on art, just being practical. But I couldn't. The thought of spending my days designing corporate logos and social media posts made me want to cry. It felt like admitting that everything I'd worked for, everything I'd believed about myself, was wrong. My grandmother had been an artist too, though she'd never made a living from it. She'd painted in her spare time while working as a seamstress, filling her small apartment with watercolors of flowers and landscapes. When I was little, I'd sit beside her and watch her paint, mesmerized by the way she could make colors blend and flow, how she could create something beautiful from nothing. She'd died when I was 15, but before she did, she'd given me her brushes and her watercolor set, the expensive one she'd saved up for years to buy. She'd told me I had a gift, that I saw the world differently, that I should never let anyone convince me to stop painting. I'd promised her I wouldn't, and even now, sleeping on a couch and selling paintings for $20 to tourists who mostly said no, I was trying to keep that promise. That August afternoon, I'd been set up for about 2 hours when the homeless woman approached. I noticed her before she reached me, mostly because she moved differently than the usual foot traffic on 5th Street. Where others rushed past with purpose and destination, she drifted, pausing to look at things, touching the brick wall gently as she walked. She was probably in her 60s, though the streets age people in ways that make it hard to tell. Her clothes were layered despite the heat, a faded blue cardigan over a floral dress over what looked like 2 other shirts. Her gray hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she carried 2 plastic bags that seemed to contain everything she owned. But it was her face that struck me. Despite everything, despite the obvious hardship and exhaustion, her eyes were kind. Bright with an intelligence that hadn't been dimmed by whatever circumstances had brought her here. She stopped in front of my paintings, and I watched as her gaze moved slowly across each one. Most people glanced and moved on, but she studied them, really looked at them, the way you look at something that matters. She spent the longest time on a painting I'd done just last week, cherry blossoms in full bloom against a pale blue sky, the petals so delicate they seemed to float off the canvas. I'd painted it from memory, thinking about the cherry trees in the park near my grandmother's apartment, how we'd walk under them every spring and she'd tell me that beauty didn't have to be loud to be important. The woman reached out as if to touch the painting, then pulled her hand back, aware that she shouldn't. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, cultured in a way that surprised me. It didn't match her appearance, and I felt ashamed for assuming it would. "This is beautiful," she said, still looking at the cherry blossoms. "Really beautiful. You're very talented." I smiled, the automatic response I'd perfected over months of sidewalk sales. "Thank you so much. That one's $20 if you're interested." She looked at me then, and I saw something in her eyes that I couldn't quite name. Sadness, maybe, or recognition, or something deeper that I didn't have words for. She glanced down at her plastic bags, at her worn shoes, and I realized with a sinking feeling what was coming next. "I don't have any money," she said quietly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have stopped. It reminded me of my daughter. We used to have cherry trees in our yard, and she loved them. She'd make me take her picture under them every spring." Her voice caught slightly on the word daughter, and I saw her swallow hard. "I haven't seen her in 3 years." Something in my chest cracked open. Maybe it was the heat, or the exhaustion, or the fact that I'd sold exactly nothing that day and was beginning to accept that I'd probably sell nothing tomorrow, too. Maybe it was the way she looked at that painting like it held something precious, something she'd lost. Or maybe it was just that I was so tired of measuring everything in terms of money and survival and practicality, and here was a moment where none of that mattered, where someone just wanted something beautiful to hold on to. "Take it," I said, before I could think about what I was doing. "Please, it's yours." She looked at me sharply, surprised, maybe suspicious. "I can't pay you." "I know. I don't want you to. I want you to have it." I picked up the painting carefully and held it out to her. "If it reminds you of your daughter, then it should be yours." For a long moment, she just stared at me, and I worried I'd somehow offended her, made her feel like a charity case. But then her eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to take the painting with both hands, cradling it like it was made of glass. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to me." I felt my own eyes sting with unexpected emotion. "I'm glad it found you." She looked at me with such intensity that I almost took a step back. "What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Chen." She repeated it slowly, like she was memorizing it. "Sarah Chen. I'm going to remember that name. I promise you. I'm going to remember." She clutched the painting closer to her chest. "You have real talent. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Don't give up." Before I could respond, before I could process the strange weight of her words, she was walking away, disappearing into the crowd of tourists and locals, my painting held carefully against her heart. I stood there for a moment, watching her go, feeling oddly lighter despite having just given away one of my better pieces. It was stupid, probably, from a business perspective. That was $20 I desperately needed, $20 I just handed to a stranger who couldn't pay. But it had felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in months, and I decided to let myself have that feeling, just for a moment, before reality crashed back in. The rest of that day I sold nothing, which wasn't surprising. I packed up my paintings as the sun started to set, my back aching from sitting on the hot concrete, my hope a little more worn than it had been that morning. Maya was working late, so I had the apartment to myself when I got back. I made ramen for dinner because it was cheap and I was trying to make my grocery budget stretch another week. I sat on the couch that was also my bed and looked at my paintings stacked against the wall. Dozens of them, hundreds of hours of work that the world didn't seem to want. I thought about my grandmother, about the promise I'd made her, and wondered if there was a difference between keeping a promise and being foolishly stubborn. That night, I applied to 3 more galleries, knowing they wouldn't respond. I updated my portfolio website that no one visited. I looked at the graphic design job listings Maya had left for me and felt sick. I thought about the homeless woman in my cherry blossom painting and hoped that wherever she was, it brought her some small amount of joy. Then I went to sleep on Maya's couch and dreamed about cherry trees and my grandmother's hands covered in paint. The next 3 years were a study in persistence, bordering on delusion. I kept selling paintings on Vimeo, kept applying to galleries, kept painting in every spare moment I had. I finally gave in to the part-time job at a coffee shop. Not graphic design, but still a compromise. Still an admission that art alone couldn't sustain me. The money helped. I was able to move out of Maya's apartment and into a tiny studio in a questionable neighborhood. A space barely big enough for a bed and an easel, but mine. Finally mine. I painted in the mornings before my shifts, sold on weekends, applied to opportunities that mostly rejected me. But something had shifted, though I couldn't have articulated what. Maybe it was giving away that painting, choosing meaning over money for once in my desperate scramble to survive. Maybe it was hitting rock bottom and discovering I could still get up. Whatever it was, my work started to change. It was still quiet, still focused on beauty and light and small moments, but there was something deeper in it now, something more honest. I painted my grandmother's hands. I painted Maya's kindness. I painted the view from my studio window, the way morning light hit the buildings across the street. I painted what it felt like to keep trying when everything said to quit. And slowly, impossibly, people started to notice. A small gallery in Queens gave me a spot in a group show. A local art blogger featured my work. Someone bought 3 paintings at once and commissioned 2 more. It wasn't much, not enough to quit my coffee shop job, but it was something. It was forward motion, proof that maybe I wasn't completely delusional. Maybe there was a place for my work in the world after all. Then, 2 months ago, I got an email that made me read it 3 times to make sure it was real. The Ashford Gallery, a prestigious space in Manhattan that I'd applied to probably 15 times over the years, wanted to offer me a solo show. A month-long exhibition, professional promotion, a real chance to be seen by serious collectors and critics. The director, Catherine Mills, said she'd been following my work for the past year and believed I was ready for this opportunity. I'd cried when I read it, called Maya screaming, called my parents who were shocked and proud and maybe a little relieved that their daughter might not be a complete failure after all. The past 2 months had been a blur of preparation. I'd painted like someone possessed, creating new pieces specifically for the show, while also selecting the best of my existing work. Catherine had been incredibly supportive, helping me with framing and presentation and pricing, teaching me how to talk about my art in ways that didn't sound apologetic. She'd priced my paintings higher than I'd ever dared, telling me firmly that undervaluing my work was insulting to both myself and potential buyers. I'd argued that no one would pay hundreds of dollars for my paintings when I'd been selling them for 20. She'd given me a look that said I had a lot to learn about the art world. The opening was tonight, and I was terrified in a way that felt completely different from my usual anxiety. This wasn't fear of failure anymore. This was fear of success, of being seen, of having to live up to the possibility that maybe I was actually good at this. Maybe I deserved to be here. I'd invited everyone I could think of: Maya, my parents, old professors, friends from art school, regular customers from the coffee shop. The gallery had sent out invitations to their mailing list, posted about it on social media, done everything they were supposed to do to generate interest. Catherine had told me to expect a good crowd, that my story of persistence would resonate with people, that my work was exactly what the gallery wanted to showcase. I spent the afternoon of the opening getting ready, trying on 6 different outfits before settling on a simple black dress that Maya insisted made me look professional and artistic. I did my makeup 3 times, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the eyeliner. Maya came over to help, talking me down from my panic, reminding me that I'd earned this, that my work was beautiful, that I was going to be amazing. She drove me to the gallery 2 hours early so I could check everything one more time, make sure every painting was hung correctly, that the lighting was right, that my artist statement didn't sound pretentious or desperate. The Ashford Gallery was beautiful. All white walls and track lighting and polished concrete floors. My paintings looked different here, important somehow, like they'd transformed from sidewalk art to something that mattered. Catherine had arranged them chronologically, showing my evolution as an artist, and I could see it now. The journey from tentative beauty to something more confident, more honest. The centerpiece was a large painting I'd done just last month, cherry blossoms falling like snow, and standing in front of it, I thought about my grandmother, about that day on 5th Street, about every moment that had led me here. People started arriving at 6, and within 30 minutes the gallery was crowded with more people than I dared to hope for. My parents came, looking proud and slightly overwhelmed by the Manhattan art scene. Maya brought half the people from her office. Old professors showed up and told me they'd always known I had something special. Strangers wandered in from the street, drawn by the crowd or the wine or genuine interest in the art. I circulated through the room, trying to talk to everyone, accepting compliments I still didn't quite believe, watching red dots appear next to my paintings indicating sales. By 7 o'clock, I'd sold 6 pieces at prices that made my head spin. Catherine kept catching my eye and grinning, clearly thrilled with how the night was going. I was talking to a collector who was interested in commissioning a piece when I saw her. At first, I didn't recognize her because the context was so wrong, so impossible. She was standing near the entrance, studying the painting of cherry blossoms that was the centerpiece of the show, and she was wearing a cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost more than my rent for 6 months. Her gray hair was styled elegantly, her posture straight and confident, and she carried a leather briefcase that screamed wealth and power. But it was her face, those same kind eyes that made my heart stop. It was the homeless woman from 5th Street, the woman I'd given my painting to 3 years ago. Except she wasn't homeless, clearly, had maybe never been homeless. And I felt the room tilt slightly as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. She turned and saw me staring, and her face broke into a smile of such warmth and recognition that I felt tears spring to my eyes. She walked toward me through the crowd, and people moved aside for her instinctively, responding to the authority she carried like a visible force. "Sarah Chen," she said when she reached me, and her voice was the same, soft and cultured, but now it matched her appearance. "I told you I'd remember your name." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, my mouth open, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the woman who'd been carrying everything she owned in plastic bags. She seemed to understand my confusion because she smiled gently and gestured to a quieter corner of the gallery. "Could we talk privately for a moment? I have some things I need to explain." I nodded mutely and followed her to Catherine's office, my mind racing with questions I couldn't articulate. She closed the door behind us, and we stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Up close, I could see that she was probably younger than I'd thought that day on the street, maybe late 50s, with the kind of face that suggested she smiled often and meant it. "I owe you an explanation," she said, setting her briefcase on Catherine's desk. "And an apology for the deception, though I hope you'll understand why it was necessary." "I don't understand anything right now," I managed to say. "Who are you?" "My name is Eleanor Ashford," she said, and I felt the world tilt again because that was the name on the gallery, the Ashford Gallery, and suddenly pieces were clicking together in ways that didn't make sense. "I own this gallery, along with 2 others in Boston and San Francisco. I also run a foundation that supports emerging artists, particularly women artists who are struggling to break into the market." I sat down heavily in Catherine's chair because my legs didn't seem to be working properly. "You own this gallery?" She nodded. "For the past 20 years. But 3 years ago, I was going through the worst period of my life. My daughter had died 6 months earlier, suddenly, from a brain aneurysm. She was 32 years old, brilliant and beautiful, and she loved cherry blossoms." Her voice caught slightly, the same way it had that day on 5th Street, and I saw the grief that was still fresh despite the years. "I was destroyed. I couldn't work, couldn't function, couldn't see the point of anything anymore. My therapist suggested I try to reconnect with the world in a different way, to see it from a perspective other than my own privilege and pain." "So you pretended to be homeless," I said slowly, trying to process this. "I spent 3 months living on the streets," she said. "Not pretending, actually living there, experiencing what that's like. I wanted to understand invisibility, to know what it felt like to be someone people look through instead of at. I wanted to be stripped of everything that gave me power and identity, and see if there was anything left underneath worth saving." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "It was the hardest and most important thing I've ever done. Most people ignored me completely. Some were cruel. A few were kind in small ways, giving me change or a smile. But you were different. I just gave you a painting," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You gave me a painting you desperately needed to sell, she corrected gently. I could see your situation, Sarah. I could see that you were struggling, that every painting mattered, that you were trying so hard to make something impossible work. And you still gave it to me, not with pity, but with genuine kindness, because it reminded me of my daughter, and you thought that mattered more than $20. She opened her briefcase and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. I've kept it with me ever since. She unwrapped it carefully, and there was my painting, the cherry blossoms I'd painted 3 years ago, perfectly preserved and protected. I felt tears start to fall, unable to stop them. That day changed everything for me, Eleanor continued. It reminded me that beauty and kindness still existed, that there were people in the world who valued human connection over personal gain. You had no idea who I was, no reason to be kind to me except that it was the right thing to do. You saw me, really saw me, when I was invisible to everyone else. She set the painting down gently. I went home that day, and I started living again. I went back to work, to the gallery, to supporting artists. But I couldn't stop thinking about you, about your talent and your kindness and your struggle. So I started following your work. Following my work? I repeated, trying to understand. I found your website, your social media, your presence on 5th Street. I watched you grow as an artist, watched you develop your voice, watched you refuse to give up even when you had every reason to. I saw when you got that spot in the Queen's Gallery, when the blogger featured you, when you started to gain recognition. And I knew that when you were ready, when your work had matured enough, I wanted to give you this opportunity. She gestured around us, indicating the gallery, the show, everything. Catherine doesn't know the full story. I told her I'd discovered you through social media and believed in your work, which is true. But I've been waiting 3 years to do this, to give you the platform you deserve. I was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the impossibility of it all, by the kindness and the connection and the strange circularity of giving something away, only to receive everything back. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Eleanor said softly. But I do have something else to tell you. She pulled a folder from her briefcase and set it on the desk. My foundation provides grants to emerging artists, full-time support for 2 years to allow them to focus entirely on their work without financial pressure. The grant is $50,000 per year, plus studio space, materials, mentorship, and exhibition opportunities. I'd like to offer you one of these grants, starting immediately. I stared at the folder like it might explode. $50,000? Per year, for 2 years. You'd be able to quit your coffee shop job, focus entirely on your art, work with established artists who can help you develop your career. We have studio space in Brooklyn that's currently available, much larger than what you have now, with good light and room to work on bigger pieces. We'd also help you build relationships with collectors and galleries, set you up for long-term success. She smiled at my expression. You're talented, Sarah, genuinely talented. But more than that, you're kind. And you have integrity. And those qualities are rare in the art world. I want to support artists who create beauty not just for its own sake, but because they believe it matters. Because they want to add something good to the world. That's who you are. I couldn't stop crying, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. This was impossible. Too much. More than I'd ever dreamed of even in my most optimistic moments. I thought about my grandmother, about her brushes that I still used, about her belief that I had a gift. I thought about Maya letting me sleep on her couch, about every painting I'd sold on 5th Street, about every rejection and failure and moment of doubt. I thought about that August afternoon 3 years ago when I'd chosen kindness over practicality and never imagined it would lead to this. Why? I finally managed to ask. Why me? Eleanor reached out and took my hand, her grip warm and firm. Because 3 years ago, when I was lost and broken and invisible, you saw me. You gave me something beautiful when you couldn't afford to, and you did it because it was right, not because you'd get anything in return. That painting of cherry blossoms has been on my desk every day since then, reminding me that there's still goodness in the world, that kindness matters, that beauty has value even when the market says it doesn't. She squeezed my hand gently. You saved me that day, Sarah. Let me return the favor. I don't know how long we sat there, both of us crying, holding hands across Catherine's desk. Eventually, Eleanor wiped her eyes and laughed softly. We should probably get back to your opening. You have a lot of people out there who want to celebrate you. We walked back into the gallery together, and I saw Maya's face light up with questions she was too polite to ask in front of Eleanor. Catherine caught my eye and raised her eyebrows, clearly dying to know what had happened. My parents were studying a painting, and my mother looked happier than I'd seen her in years. The gallery was still crowded, people drinking wine and looking at my work, and I saw more red dots indicating sales, more evidence that maybe I'd been wrong all along about my place in the art world. Eleanor stayed for another hour, talking to collectors and other gallery owners, and I watched as she quietly promoted my work with the kind of influence that only comes from decades of respect and authority. She introduced me to people who could help my career, made connections I'd never have been able to make on my own, and did it all with genuine warmth and pride. Before she left, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Your grandmother would be so proud of you." I don't know how she knew about my grandmother, but somehow it didn't surprise me that she did. Eleanor seemed to see things other people missed, to understand connections that weren't obvious. She promised to be in touch about the grant, told me to think about it, though we both knew I'd accept. And then she was gone, leaving me standing in a gallery full of my paintings with a future that suddenly felt real and possible and mine. The opening was a success by every measure. I sold 12 paintings that night, more than I'd sold in the entire previous year. Catherine was thrilled, already talking about future shows and building my reputation. People asked for my contact information, wanted to commission work, told me they'd been moved by my art. Maya stayed until the very end, helping me process what had happened, reminding me to breathe when I started to panic about whether I deserved any of this. But the moment I kept coming back to, the one that made everything else make sense, was standing with Eleanor in Catherine's office, understanding that a single act of kindness 3 years ago had created ripples I couldn't have imagined. I'd given away a painting because it seemed like the right thing to do, because someone needed beauty more than I needed $20, and that choice had somehow led to this, to everything I'd ever wanted, and more than I dared to dream. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics and life changes. I accepted Eleanor's grant, quit my coffee shop job with a mixture of relief and terror, and moved into the Brooklyn studio space she'd arranged. It was enormous compared to my tiny apartment, with huge windows that let in perfect northern light and enough room for me to work on multiple pieces at once. The foundation provided everything I needed: canvases, paints, framing materials, even a small stipend for living expenses on top of the grant money. For the first time in my adult life, I could focus entirely on my art without the constant anxiety of survival. Eleanor introduced me to other artists in the Foundation's program, established painters and sculptors who became mentors and friends. They taught me about the business side of art, about pricing and contracts and protecting my work. They pushed me to be bolder, to trust my vision, to stop apologizing for taking up space. They shared their own stories of struggle and persistence, and I realized that almost everyone successful in the art world had gone through their own version of selling paintings on the street, of being rejected and overlooked, and told they weren't good enough. I also got to know Eleanor better, understanding the full scope of what she'd built. Her foundation had supported over 100 artists in the past 15 years, many of whom had gone on to successful careers. She'd created a network of support and opportunity that was changing the art world from the inside, making space for voices that might otherwise never be heard. She did it all quietly, without seeking recognition, driven by a genuine belief that art mattered and artists deserved support. We talked often about that day on Fifth Street, about what we'd each been going through, about the strange miracle of our connection. She told me more about her daughter, about the cherry trees in their yard, about the grief that had nearly destroyed her. I told her about my grandmother, about the promise I'd made, about the years of doubt and struggle. We both cried, and we both laughed, and I understood that what we'd given each other that day went both ways. I'd given her beauty and kindness when she needed it most, but she'd given me something just as important. She'd seen my worth when I couldn't see it myself. My work began to evolve in ways I hadn't expected. I was still painting beauty, still focused on light and quiet moments, but there was more depth to it now, more confidence. I started working on larger pieces, ambitious projects that would have terrified me a year ago. I painted a series about my grandmother, about her hands and her flowers and the way she'd taught me to see. I painted Maya's kindness, the way she'd given me space to fail and keep trying. I painted cherry blossoms, of course, but now they carried layers of meaning about loss and hope and unexpected grace. 6 months after the gallery opening, Eleanor organized a show specifically for foundation artists, a group exhibition that would tour to all 3 of her galleries. My work was featured prominently, and the critical response was better than I'd dared to hope. Reviews praised my technical skill and emotional depth, compared me to established artists, suggested I was someone to watch. Collectors started seeking out my work specifically, willing to pay prices that still made me dizzy. I was making a living from my art, actually making a living, and the reality of it felt both surreal and inevitable, like I'd finally stepped into a life that had been waiting for me all along. But the moment that mattered most came almost a year after that opening night, when Eleanor invited me to her home for dinner. She lived in a beautiful brownstone in the West Village, filled with art and books and the kind of quiet elegance that comes from having both money and taste. We ate in her garden, under cherry trees that were just beginning to bloom, and she told me about her daughter, about the life she'd lived and the dreams she'd had. Her daughter had wanted to be an artist too, had been talented and passionate, but she'd died before she could pursue it seriously. I think about her every day, Eleanor said, looking up at the cherry blossoms. I think about what she would have created, what she would have become. And I think about how grateful I am that I found you, that I get to support artists like you in her memory. She turned to me with tears in her eyes. You've given me a way to honor her, Sarah. Every time I see your work, every time I help an artist through the foundation, I feel like I'm keeping her dream alive. I reached across the table and took her hand, both of us crying under the cherry trees, and I thought about how strange and beautiful life could be, how a single moment of kindness could create connections that changed everything. I'd given her a painting because it reminded her of her daughter, and she'd given me a future because I'd reminded her that beauty and compassion still existed in the world. We'd saved each other, really, in ways that went beyond money or opportunity or success. Now, 2 years after that August afternoon on Fifth Street, I'm preparing for my second solo show at the Ashford Gallery. My work hangs in private collections and museums. I've been featured in art magazines and interviewed about my journey from sidewalk artist to gallery representation. I have more commissions than I can keep up with, more opportunities than I ever imagined. I'm making a living doing what I love, what my grandmother believed I could do, what I'd almost given up on believing myself. But more than any of that, I have Eleanor in my life, a mentor and friend who sees me clearly and believes in me completely. I have Maya, who never stopped supporting me even when I was sleeping on her couch and selling paintings for $20. I have my parents' pride, finally earned. I have a community of artists who understand the struggle and the joy of creating something from nothing. I have a life that feels authentic and meaningful and mine. I still paint cherry blossoms, of course. They're my signature now, the thing people associate with my work. But they mean something different than they used to. They're not just beautiful anymore. They're about my grandmother and Eleanor's daughter, and the fleeting nature of life, and the importance of creating beauty while we can. They're about kindness and connection, and the ripples we create without knowing it. They're about the day I chose to give something away and received everything back. The painting I gave Eleanor that day still sits on her desk at the gallery. She's refused multiple offers to buy it, told me it's not for sale at any price. Sometimes when I visit her office, I stand in front of it and remember who I was then. Desperate, struggling, invisible, but still capable of kindness. I remember the woman in layered clothes carrying plastic bags, and I remember choosing to see her humanity over my own need. I remember thinking that $20 didn't matter as much as giving someone a moment of beauty, and I remember having no idea how right I was. Eleanor tells people that I saved her life that day, but the truth is more complicated than that. We saved each other in ways that neither of us could have predicted. I gave her beauty when she needed it most, and she gave me the future I'd been fighting for. I saw her when she was invisible, and she saw my worth when I couldn't. We were both lost in different ways, and somehow, impossibly, we found each other. People ask me sometimes what I've learned from my journey, what advice I'd give to struggling artists. I tell them to keep creating, to trust their vision, to persist even when everything says to quit. But mostly, I tell them to be kind, to see people, to value human connection over personal gain. Because you never know who you're helping, or how, or what ripples your kindness might create. You never know when giving something away might be the thing that brings everything back. I think about that a lot now. As I prepare for shows and meet with collectors and build the career I'd almost stopped believing was possible. I think about how close I came to giving up, how many times I almost quit, how easily I could have walked past that woman on 5th Street because I was too focused on my own survival to see anyone else's need. I think about how different my life would be if I'd made that choice, if I'd valued $20 over compassion, if I'd been too scared or selfish or practical to give away something I couldn't afford to lose. But I didn't. I stopped. I saw her. I gave her beauty because it seemed like the right thing to do, and that choice changed everything. It changed her life, pulling her back from grief and despair. And it changed mine, leading me to opportunities and connections I never could have found on my own. One small act of kindness, one moment of choosing compassion over convenience, and everything transformed. That's what I want people to understand when they look at my work now, when they see the cherry blossoms and the light and the quiet beauty. I want them to know that these paintings exist because someone believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, because someone saw my worth when I was invisible, because someone chose to invest in my dreams when I'd almost given up on them. And all of that happened because 3 years ago, on a hot August afternoon, I chose kindness over $20. I still sell paintings, but not on the street anymore. Now they hang in galleries with proper lighting and professional framing and prices that reflect their actual value. Now people collect them, write about them, use them to understand something about beauty and hope and the human capacity for grace. Now I make a living from my art, support myself, and even help others live the life my grandmother dreamed for me, and I'd almost stopped believing was possible. But I never forget where I started. I never forget what it felt like to be invisible, struggling, one bad month away from giving up entirely. I never forget the kindness of people like Maya, who gave me space to fail and keep trying. Or the wisdom of my grandmother, who taught me that beauty mattered even when the world said it didn't. And I never forget Eleanor, both as the homeless woman who needed beauty and as the powerful figure who chose to invest in mine. Eleanor and I have talked about expanding the foundation, creating more opportunities for struggling artists, building a network of support that could help people like I was 3 years ago. We want to find the artists who are selling their work on street corners and in coffee shops, who are sleeping on couches and working survival jobs, who are this close to giving up but still creating beauty anyway. We want to tell them that their work matters, that their persistence is valuable, that there's a place for them in the art world even if they can't see it yet. Because that's what I learned from all of this, from the struggle and the kindness and the impossible transformation. I learned that worth isn't determined by market success or gallery representation or critical acclaim. Worth is intrinsic, inherent, independent of external validation. I was worthy when I was selling paintings for $20 on 5th Street, and I'm worthy now that they sell for thousands in galleries. The only thing that changed was other people's recognition of what was always there. And I learned that kindness creates ripples we can't predict or control. When I gave that painting to Eleanor, I had no idea who she was, or what it would mean, or how it would change my life. I just knew that someone needed beauty more than I needed money, and I chose accordingly. That's all any of us can do, really. Make the kind choice in the moment we're in and trust that it matters, even if we never see how. So when people look at my cherry blossoms now, when they see the delicate petals and the soft light and the quiet beauty, I hope they see more than just a pretty painting. I hope they see the story behind it, the struggle and the kindness and the unexpected grace. I hope they see my grandmother's hands and Eleanor's grief and Maya's couch and every moment that led to this. I hope they see that beauty matters, that compassion creates miracles, that giving something away can sometimes be the thing that brings everything back. What an incredible journey from that sweltering sidewalk to gallery walls and a life dedicated to art. Sarah's story reminds us that the kindness we show to strangers, especially when it costs us something we can barely afford to give, can create transformations we never imagined possible. Sometimes the people we help are actually the ones positioned to help us, and sometimes our greatest opportunities come disguised as sacrifices. What would you have done in Sarah's situation? Would you have given away that painting when you desperately needed the money? Or would you have kept walking? Have you ever made a choice to help someone that ended up changing your own life in unexpected ways? Share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear about the moments when kindness created ripples in your life. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that compassion matters more than convenience, that true worth isn't measured by immediate profit, and that beauty has value even when the market doesn't recognize it, please show your support by hitting that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss our inspiring stories about real people whose kindness and courage transform their lives. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.